So the Brazilian Grand Prix, a nice tension-building opening 60 laps where Hamilton and Verstappen kept each other honest. And then without any warning, all hell broke loose. The Ferraris drive into each other. Bottas's engine explodes. Gasly in his Toro Rosso in podium contention. Gasly in his Toro Rosso no longer in podium contention. Alex Albon in podium contention. Hamilton drives into Albon. Albon no longer in podium contention. Albon in 15th. Gasly in 2nd place. Hamilton in 3rd place. Hamilton gets a penalty. Sainz in 3rd place. The Alfa Romeos get 4th and 5th. Potential penalties galore. And then I had to take a breath since all of this was too much for my fragile heart to take. Hello and welcome to the TF1 Show's recap of the Brazilian Grand Prix. I'm your host, Tinus Ferreira, and I'm still a bit shell-shocked after having sat through that whole traumatic experience. Now, watching Verstappen and Hamilton going at it for 60 odd laps was exciting enough, but after all of the ridiculous things that happened thereafter, this race is undoubtedly, I think, one of the best, if not the best, races of the year. And we've had some incredible ones if you think back to Germany, to Silverstone, to Hungary, to Austrian Grand Prix. We've just had some brilliant races, but this one, I think, in terms of pure, unexpected outcomes and crazy events, I think this one is right up there. So let's get into what happened, and let's start as per usual with the victors. Now, Max Verstappen and Red Bull were victorious for, I think this is now their 3rd victory of the year after winning in Austria and winning in Germany. And I think this is definitely a deserved one from Verstappen's point of view. Verstappen got the pole position, which was, I think, a very impressive performance by him. He looked on top of things right from the outset. He's very comfortable, I think, at this Brazilian Grand Prix at Interlagos at the circuit. And he controlled the race. He was under some serious pressure from Hamilton throughout, especially I think after the first stints. He got undercut by Hamilton actually, after the first round of pit stops, but a bit of a mistake by Hamilton with his battery and a good outlap by Verstappen meant that he was able to overtake Hamilton back into 1st place. And it was a bit of a cat and mouse situation between Verstappen and Hamilton the whole race through. And then obviously when the safety car started coming out because of firstly Bottas's engine that broke and then the Ferraris that drove into each other, and we'll obviously talk about that a bit later. Verstappen, I think, and Red Bull's strategy team handled all of those sort of decisions, I think, the best out of all of the teams, and then finally eventually led to quite a comfortable victory for Max Verstappen on the day. I think overall for Max, I think it's an encouraging result. I don't think we need to read in too much into the result in terms of the overall picking order of the teams. I think Red Bull are very much in the mix, as they were over the last 10 or so races. So I think, again, a good performance. I think the track suits the car very well. I think the high altitude doesn't suit the Mercedes very well. So, and as we saw with Hamilton and Pierre Gasly, dragging up to the finish line on the final lap, the Honda engine, I think, copes with the higher altitude a bit better than the Mercedes engine. So I think that definitely helped Red Bull and Verstappen today. But not to take anything away from their victory, I think it's a very convincing one. And if they can have a bit more of these in 2020, I think we're on for a really, really fascinating championship fight between Red Bull and Mercedes, and then obviously Ferrari. That is, if Ferrari's two drivers manage to not drive into each other, of course. Now, I guess we need to talk about the biggest heartbreak probably in my life, probably in this decade, maybe even in the whole of human history. And that was Alex Albon's very much almost podium. He was running in second place right up until, I think the second to last lap, after driving a good race, keeping himself in contention. Obviously got a bit lucky with the first safety car with Bottas's engine, but he did such a good job to get past Sebastian Vettel on the safety car restart and to take third place behind Hamilton and behind Verstappen. It's just, I guess, one of those things, but my heart was breaking for Alex, just because he was such a nice guy, and I think he was really working towards this first podium, and he really put himself in a position to get a brilliant result for himself and for the team. And just the way that it ended up, Hamilton made a bit of a lunge there at the end. I think Hamilton should have just waited till the straight. I think he would have gotten past Albon into second place, but Albon did leave the door very open. Hamilton already, he's sewn up the championship, so he was going for broke the entire race. And it happened. Albon span out. He had to rejoin the track in 15th, and I might have to undergo a year or so some severe psychological counseling, because I just felt so bad for the guy. And I think what made it even worse for me was how well he presented himself after the race. He was quite sort of pragmatic, he very reflective, actually apologetic in a sense, where he said that he sort of didn't think Hamilton was going to try it, but he also sort of said no, he could have handled the situation better. And just, I really do hope that things work out for him sooner rather than later, because I think it was just such an unlucky thing to happen to him. But I think, stepping away from the actual result, we need to look at how Albon did in qualifying as well, I guess. And there's definitely some room for improvement for Alex. He qualified in 5th place after allowing for Leclerc's engine penalty. So technically he qualified in 6th. He was not too far off Bottas and Leclerc's time, so I think it didn't give a bad account of himself. But if you measure how far behind Verstappen he was, I think that's less encouraging for him. Now, obviously, some mitigating circumstances. I think probably Interlagos is Max Verstappen's best track on the calendar, so that's the track where he performs at his best. And it was the first time that Albon has ever driven around the track, so I guess that is something you need to take into account. But I don't think Albon will be pleased with his qualifying performance. I don't think he was, after listening to him on Saturday. So I really do hope Albon can step it up a bit more in qualifying. Let's see in Abu Dhabi, where he has driven before, whether he can give a better account of himself on the Saturday. And I really do hope he can string a good result together in the race. And obviously now with the news that Albon is confirmed for the season next year, so he will be partnering Max Verstappen in 2020, which I think is the right decision by Red Bull as well. Ironically, given the result of today and what Pierre Gasly was able to do, but I think right result for Red Bull, and I do hope that we can see Albon go from strength to strength. And speaking of Mr. Gasly, let's talk about him and his incredible second place. I mean, who would have thought a few races ago that Pierre Gasly would have been able to, never mind get on the podium, but actually score a second place. Now, we have to say that he got a bit lucky. I think probably he was on for a 4th place, not even allowing for the fact that the two Ferraris took each other out, and that Valtteri Bottas' engine blew up, obviously. But you need to put yourself in the position to capitalize on other people's mistakes and other people's misfortunes, and that's exactly what Gasly did. And I think if you look at his race weekend as a whole, he was very much, I think, the standout performer of the midfield. He was constantly on the pace. He seemed to be best of the race in terms of race pace throughout. I think he qualified in 7th. He was best of the race in the midfield in qualifying. Drove a very, very good race as well. Kept out of trouble. Never put, he didn't put a foot wrong. So, and such a redemptive story, I guess, for Pierre Gasly after being demoted from Red Bull in the middle of the year, after struggling so much with the car and just really sort of languishing in 7th, 8th place in a car that should be much higher up the grid. And I think this shows that Gasly is actually a very, very handy driver, and he does have a lot of talent and a lot of capability. And I think it also shows that Red Bull car is a very weird car to drive. I think it definitely probably requires a very specific driving style, something that Gasly wasn't able to completely get on top of. I think Albon is still trying to figure it out, especially in qualifying. In the races, I think he's a bit more on top of things, but yeah, I think the Red Bull obviously isn't the easiest car to understand and sort of just get in and drive. So I think very encouraging for Pierre Gasly. He's going to continue with Toro Rosso next year as well, so you never know. I think it's going to be a long shot given what happened at Red Bull, but if he can continue putting in performances like this, you never know, Gasly might be back in the top team after a couple of months again. The probation period for that second seat at Red Bull never ends. But yeah, I think let's just wait and see how it all pans out. Now, Gasly's teammate Daniel Kvyat had a bit of an anonymous Grand Prix. He qualified in 16th, which, if you compare that against Gasly qualified in 7th, is definitely not something you want against your name. So Kvyat will definitely be disappointed with that. And then he got a P10 in the race, so he scored the final point. But that's after allowing for the fact that 2 Ferraris retired. Albon got driven into, Bottas's engine blew up, so he basically got 4 positions for free, and he scored the final point. So not a great Grand Prix for Kvyat, and I think especially given how well Gasly's Grand Prix went, not a great result. So he'll definitely want to improve on that. Let's move on to our third placed man and our third placed team, which is Carlos Sainz and McLaren. Now, for a while, we weren't sure whether this is actually going to be the case because, as I mentioned in the intro, Lewis Hamilton actually finished third on the road, but he got a 5-second penalty for his ambitious move on Albon, and that then meant that Carlos Sainz came in third after starting right at the back of the grid in 20th place, which I think is a phenomenal performance by Sainz once again. And people will now come out and say, yes, but Carlos Sainz benefited from the safety car and he was just very lucky. But and I'm going to be honest, it was very difficult to really follow what was going on in the midfield throughout the race with all of the different strategies going on. But Sainz made a one-stop strategy work. He was able to, after the safety car restart, the first one, keep all of the guys on the new tyres behind him, even though he was on much older tyres. He didn't drop any positions. He was defending like mad. He was able to conserve enough tyres to keep himself at a relative pace at the end of the race. I think that's what an incredible performance and result for probably, and I think I'm very much now on the brink of saying he was probably going to be my star driver of 2019. I think a well-deserved podium for him, a well-deserved podium for McLaren. I do feel bad that he wasn't able to celebrate it properly, on the actual podium with the champagne and the music and just the sort of celebration of it all. But I think they'll take it. I think they're going to be very grateful. This is going to absolutely galvanize the McLaren team. If they weren't galvanized already, they're going to come back swinging. I have a suspicion next year, and I hope they can start mixing it more and more with the top 3 teams. And yeah, what a brilliant result for Carlos Sainz, and so well deserved. And Lando Norris had a bit of a difficult day, a difficult weekend actually, where he qualified in 11th, and I think interestingly, both McLarens actually struggled at Interlagos throughout with both. I think they just didn't feel they had the pace or the car underneath them, and it sort of showed with Norris's qualifying performance, and then also with Norris, ending up 8th on the track. I think they had a few sort of weird strategy decisions, and also some of the tyres just didn't switch on for Norris, and that basically meant that he was struggling throughout. But some good points scored, I guess, for Lando. He'll be disappointed, but I think for the team in general, this is still a very positive result. And yeah, definitely by far and far away the 4th best team this year so far. And I think it's just going to be a bit of a celebratory victory race for them in Abu Dhabi after a very, very positive year. Now, before we get into the rest of the midfield, I think it's probably fair to just quickly chat about our two other top teams, if you can call it that. So Mercedes and Ferrari. And let's talk about Mercedes first, because they had a bit of an interesting weekend where obviously Toto Wolff, the team principal, decided not to come to Brazil. And I think in hindsight, he's thinking, maybe you should have made the trip, because it was slightly chaotic for Mercedes, I think, throughout. Qualifying was okay, I guess, for them, with Hamilton qualifying in third and Bottas in fifth, which then meant he started in fourth place after Leclerc's demotion. Now, it was interesting for me, especially in qualifying, that they showed really good pace in free practice 3, where Hamilton was actually the fastest. And I thought they were going to, probably be able to dominate from the front. And then all of a sudden, the track temperature started cooling down, and all of a sudden, the Mercedes lost its pace. It couldn't switch on the tires. And then it was a bit of a struggle, I think, for Mercedes. And Hamilton, rightfully, after the qualifying session, said that the third position was the best outcome they could have hoped for, really. They just didn't really have the speed in the conditions that they required. So Hamilton pretty happy with third place. I thought Hamilton was very, very good at the start of the race, where he got a pretty decent start, even I'd say compared to Vettel, but he was super late on the brakes on the outside of the Senna S's and actually snuck past Sebastian Vettel at the first corner, which then set him up for the boss battle with Verstappen at the front, which I thought was very nice to see. I think Hamilton and Verstappen going toe-to-toe was fascinating. Hamilton sort of just driving and doing whatever he wanted to, basically, was entertaining to see. He was driving the strategy calls. He was saying, no, let's do an undercut, let's do this, let's do that, and the team was allowing him to. So it was sort of nice to see Hamilton's racing brain working as well, him taking a bit of, control. And, he got ahead once or twice. I think it was close a few times. I think he was quite upset with his team after the first, round of pit stops, where he actually was able to undercut Verstappen. And he used up too much of his battery on his out lap, which then meant that when Verstappen came out, he wasn't able to defend against Verstappen on the main straight, which then meant Verstappen basically walked past him and back into first place. But I think overall a good performance by Hamilton in the race again, right up until things got a bit haywire, during the last 10 laps, where after the first safety car, Mercedes decided to basically do the opposite of Verstappen, which then meant that Verstappen pitted and Hamilton stayed out on his older medium tires. That then meant that Hamilton was a bit of a sitting duck on the restart, and Verstappen breezed past once again. I thought Hamilton did a good job, after being passed by Verstappen, to actually keep Albon and Vettel and Leclerc behind him on his much older tires. But then Leclerc and Vettel quite kindly decided to drive into each other, which then meant another safety car came out about, I think it was 4 or 5 laps before the end of the race. Now, this is where I was quite surprised that Hamilton then decided to go and pit again, because that effectively relegated him from second to fourth. Now, Mercedes actually said after the race that they miscalculated, what was going to happen, and they thought that Hamilton was going to come out in third behind Albon. But they were very much at risk of basically finishing behind the safety car with 4 laps to go, and then basically having pitted Hamilton's podium away with him in fourth place. Now, obviously, it didn't transpire like that, with the race being restarted 2 laps before the end of the race. Now, Hamilton got past Gasly quite quickly, and then the fateful crash, the fateful late lunge into Alex Albon's car, which then meant Hamilton had a broken front wing. Gasly got past him as well. Hamilton actually raced Gasly quite competitively, even with half of his front wing missing, and was about half a tenth from taking second place at the finish line. But Hamilton quite rightly, I think, put his hand up at the end of the race and was very upfront about the fact that he made a mistake, and it's completely his fault, and that he's apologizing to Alex. and he got a 5-second penalty for his troubles, which then meant Hamilton was actually relegated to 7th place, given how closely packed the cars were right after the safety car restart. So, I mean, it was an entertaining one for Mercedes. I think it was very nice to sort of see them just, throw caution to the wind and try things with strategy and just, trying to do interesting things. So that was very nice to see for Mercedes. Not their best race outcome, but they've sewn up both of the championships. So I guess they're just going to try and maximize now in Abu Dhabi. Now, Valtteri Bottas, not really much I can say about him. He's been a bit anonymous this weekend, and I think after his very successful outing in Austin 2 weeks ago, we probably would have wanted to see a bit more from him. And I think a weekend like this is something that he cannot afford next year if he wants to challenge Hamilton, because Hamilton is going to be strong every weekend. There hasn't really been any race weekend that I can think of where Hamilton hasn't been in contention for either a win or a podium. And Bottas can't afford to be off the pace like this, where he just sort of languishes in 5th place or in 4th place, not really doing anything, just sort of, not trying to go backwards and not actually making any progress. So I think probably a relatively poor performance from Bottas, and I think his engine braking was just putting him out of his misery, to be honest. So yeah, I think let's leave that there. And I guess when you talk about misery, we need to talk about Ferrari, because, I mean, what are they doing? I'm speechless. And I actually tweeted during the race that what happened there was the most Ferrari thing to happen, where they're side by side on the straight, and then Vettel moves, slightly across. And I guess let's before I actually describe the incident, let's just give some context. So Vettel was actually, sitting quite nicely in 3rd place after, the round of pit stops, and also after the first safety car by Valtteri Bottas, which then obviously bunched everybody up. Now, Charles Leclerc, his teammate, was doing a very good job of fighting his way back after starting in 14th place with an engine penalty. So he was running, I think, in 6th place at the time, with Albon in 5th, something like that. But basically, after the round of pit stops and safety cars, Albon was running in 4th, in 3rd, with Vettel and Leclerc in 4th and 5th respectively, with Leclerc having pitted under the safety car to put on a fresh new set of tyres, which were slightly, obviously, a bit newer than Vettel's. Now, Ferrari said, listen, the championship is over, so you guys are allowed to race each other, which is fair enough. But then all chaos ensued, with Leclerc trying to overtake Vettel on his new tyres on the main straight, managed to do so. Vettel cutting back, and on the next straight, the back straight, basically coming right back past Charles Leclerc. Leclerc sort of trying to just give Vettel a car's width on his right side. Vettel deciding, no, that's not good enough. After, I think his rear wheel was about in line with Leclerc's front wheel, Vettel then decided to move, over to the left, and Leclerc said, no way, Jose, he will hold station. They had the slightest of touches, and Leclerc's front suspension immediately disintegrated. Vettel got a right rear puncture, and both Ferraris were out of the race. Now, yes, what can you say? So I guess firstly, it happens, which is probably going to be their main defense, but something like that should not happen in the way it did. I think both drivers were stupid. Vettel was probably more at fault than Leclerc, but I actually agreed with the eventual sort of decision made by the stewards, where they said that, no driver was predominantly at fault. And I think a lot of people will disagree with me and with the stewards, because I think a lot of people feel that Vettel was actually at fault. But I think that Leclerc had so much racetrack to his left to drive into, or to just sort of use to give Vettel a bit more space. It wasn't necessary for him to cut it that fine. For Leclerc, obviously, was definitely not necessary for Vettel to sort of start moving to the left. But Leclerc, it's not like Leclerc had nowhere to go. And it's also not like it would have really changed his position relative to Vettel. Would have, left him with such big of a disadvantage compared to Sebastian Vettel at that stage, given that Vettel was already past basically Leclerc at that stage. So I think Leclerc just wanted to prove a point and not give up the position that easily. I think he wanted to outbrake Vettel at the end of the straight and still have a relatively good line going into the turn 4. And he made the conscious decision to not give Vettel more room than what was required. And Vettel decided that he will do exactly the same and squeeze Leclerc to basically similar to what Leclerc did to Hamilton in Monza, I feel, so which he didn't get penalized for. So I think it was just two drivers being stubborn, two drivers not wanting to yield, two drivers wanting to show that they are in fact the prima donna of the Ferrari team, and that basically led to the team's result ending in 0 points and egg on all of their faces. And this is definitely going to be something that's going to be it's going to have to be very, very well managed by Ferrari and Mattia Binotto, especially next year, because I think Vettel is now a bit more comfortable with the car. I think Leclerc was more comfortable initially, but now Vettel has found his feet, and I think it's now very close again between those two. And I will predict lots and lots of things similar to this if Ferrari isn't going to be very careful and is not going to keep a very tight leash on these two, because similar to what happened with Hamilton and Rosberg, things can get really ugly really quickly. And I thought it was well done by Binotto after the race, where he was very calm. He said, listen, obviously very bad thing that happened, but he's not apportioning blame. They will talk about it after the race, not making a scene, not making a fuss, not apportioning blame. So I think well done by Binotto in terms of sort of crisis management. And I also think they were slightly fortunate that so many things after the accident happened to sort of draw the attention away a bit from that whole incident. But Ferrari is going to do better. They're going to have to do better, I guess. And it's also, and that's not even talking about, sort of the fact that things have still been swirling around their engine power and the technical directive still going out, where Mercedes and Red Bull are still, putting in questions and queries to the FIA around the legality of the Ferrari engine. And then it seemed like the Ferrari engine didn't really have the power in qualifying. So it's going to be very interesting to see in Abu Dhabi, where they are a bit more straight and it's going to be a bit more of a Ferrari track, whether Ferrari's massive engine advantage is going to be back or whether the advantage is going to be smaller. So not a great race for Ferrari. I think a few question marks over them. Race pace still seems to be a bit of a struggle. They were definitely not in the same league as Hamilton and Verstappen up front. So they're going to have to somehow work to improve that as well. They're going to go away licking their wounds. So let's leave that there. Now their sister team, the Alfa Romeos, what an incredible result for them, with Raikkonen in 4th place and Giovinazzi in 5th. That's an incredible haul of points, I think, for the team, and it's going to make, Racing Point and Haas very, very sad. And even Renault, with a points haul like that, it sort of changes the complexion of the Constructors' Championship for the midfield team. So that'll be a very welcome result for them, especially after the struggles that they've been having over the past couple of races. Kimi Raikkonen was just a war horse during this whole weekend, drove such a good race after difficult qualifying. I'm very impressed. Well, not that difficult of a qualifying, I guess, but yeah, just Raikkonen putting the car in the right place at the right time, very similar to what Pierre Gasly did. And Antonio Giovinazzi not making any mistakes, finally stringing a good result together. Yeah, I just think such an encouraging result for them and well deserved. Not much more I can say there. Now, Renault had a bit of a struggle, I think, in qualifying, and I think they've been very open about the fact that qualifying has been difficult for them, especially compared to McLaren. But they've typically shown good speed in the race with, especially Daniel Ricciardo. He came home in 6th place. I think it was a bit of a whirlwind for both Ricciardo and for Hülkenberg. And as I've mentioned previously, for me to keep track of all of the different things going on with the midfield with strategy, I think, everybody sort of decided to do different things, and then the safety cars and the pit stops, and then I think everybody just sort of ended up in haphazard places at the end of the day, depending on what happened with strategy and how well the safety car played into what the teams are doing. So good result for Ricciardo in 6th, Hülkenberg in 15th. He got a time penalty for overtaking, I think for overtaking someone before the start-finish straight after the safety car restart, which you're not allowed to do. So not a great race for Hulk, but a decent race for Ricciardo. But not a great outcome for Renault, given that Toro Rosso had its second place and that Alfa Romeo has a fourth and a fifth. So that actually means that Renault is making a bit of a net loss when it comes to points compared to their competitors. So again, a bit of an opportunity lost for them, and I think they are probably desperate for the season to be over so they can go back and reevaluate things a bit more. Racing Point, not really much I can say there. Perez came home in 9th place. A bit of an anonymous race for Sergio Perez. Not a great performance, I'd say. Lance Stroll had a DNF after, I think, a suspension failure with some debris. I think the main thing just to point out here is Lance Stroll went out in Q1 again. So he has to do something about his qualifying pace. And I've said this before in previous episodes, but Lance Stroll needs to address that, because that's not acceptable for you to have such a big deficit to your teammate and to not, put the car in its rightful place with regards to the pecking order, especially in qualifying, because you can't make so much work for yourself every single race to then catch up and then make up places, and that's just never going to lead to the type of consistent results that you need. So Lance Stroll, I need you to be better. Talking about being better, now, let's just talk about Haas, and let's say that they are the Formula One racing team equivalent of, I think, like the Bermuda Triangle. Now, the Bermuda Triangle, for those who don't know, is basically a little area in the Pacific where nobody really knows what's going on. All that they know is that for some reasons, airplanes crash and ships disappear, and it's just all very hazy and very weird in terms of explaining what exactly is going on and what's causing all of these suspicious events, if you can call it that. And Haas is the Bermuda Triangle of Formula One, because you can see what's happening each and every race, but nobody can explain why it's happening. Not Haas, not the drivers, not me, not any of the press, not any of the other teams. Haas is the biggest enigma, and I don't even think Alan Turing would have been able to solve what the hell is going on there, because for some unknown reason, all of a sudden they rediscovered their qualifying pace for the first time since Austria. Both of the cars in Q3 with, just incidentally, with the Australia specs. In other words, the car that they started the season with in Australia, just faster than everybody else. All of a sudden, both cars in Q3. And then in the race, the typical thing where they just move backwards for no reason. Magnussen got a bit unlucky with an incident with Ricciardo, for which Ricciardo was actually penalized. But no points again for Haas. Magnussen in 11th, Grosjean in 13th. After both of them finished in Q3, they must be desperate for the season to end, because it's just been so strange. They must be the most confused people in the world, because nobody can understand what that car is doing. And let's hope for their sake that they can figure it out. Lastly, I'll make a quick pit stop at Williams. George Russell actually close to a point. He came in 12th place. So a good performance, I guess, for them relative to their typical performance, but still very much the team bringing up the rear, with Robert Kubica in last place as well. So not much to say there, except I really hope that they can do better, because I'm starting to worry about George Russell. He is, I think, a guy that can mix with Leclerc, who can mix it with Leclerc and Verstappen and Norris and all of those guys, and he is not given the opportunity to. So Toto Wolff needs to make the magic happen and get Russell a better seat if he can't somehow pull Williams up by the bootstraps. Alrighty, that I guess is my views on all of the different teams and all of the different drivers, which then of course means we can move to the TF1 awards. Alright, the Pastor Maldonado Award for Most Dunderheaded Deed. Now I think the winners are clear, but a very close second has to go to Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes for pitting 4 laps before the end of the race under the safety car to move from 2nd to 4th. If the race finished under the safety car, that would have been catastrophic. But it didn't, so no matter. The winners of this award are therefore our two Ferrari drivers who managed to drive into each other on a massive straight with more than enough space for both. They need to do better. The Lewis Hamilton #Blessed award has to go to Pierre Gasly, who drove an incredible race, but his second place was absolutely down to Hamilton driving into Albon. But still an amazing outcome for Monsieur Gasly. The Nico Hülkenberg Podium Award for Unluckiest Driver has to go to Alex Albon. My poor heart has so much sorrow for what happened to him, and I truly hope he can bounce back as quickly as possible. Right, so as per tradition, we need to ask ourselves the most important questions that we take away from the race. Will Mattia Binotto fit both Charles Leclerc and Sebastian Vettel with shock collars in order to keep those two dunderheads in check? Can Christian Horner's love and passion for Verstappen grow even more? Will Pierre Gasly ever recover his voice after all that shouting? Will we ever see Carlos Sainz during a race broadcast? Even when he finished on the podium, I can recall exactly 3 seconds of Carlos Sainz footage during the entire race. And lastly, will my poor heart ever recover from the heartbreak that was Alex Albon losing his podium? I seriously doubt it. Well, dear friends, we are one race away from the end of the season, and I can't believe that this year went by so quickly. The Brazilian Grand Prix was definitely one of the highlights, and this brings my recap of the race to an end. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe or leave a rating and a comment. You can also follow me on Twitter, where my handle is @TF1 Show, or on Instagram, where my handle is @TheTF1 Show. And you can please join me for the build-up, for the final race in Abu Dhabi in 2 weeks' time. See you soon. Bye.